everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan and today I'm doing a general video guide on how to replace an ABS wheel speed sensor in pretty much any car that has them. I picked pretty much the hardest vehicle I've ever encountered for replacing a wheel speed sensor just because of how much of the interior and inner fender you kind of have to take apart. On trucks and even other cars, especially in the front, they're a lot easier, so I'm glad I showed basically the hardest one I've ever encountered. Yours is probably easier, but if it's more difficult, just take your time, take apart the interior very carefully, and do your best not to break anything. I made this video as general as possible because I wanted to be able to service a bunch of different makes and models. Yours might look a little bit different, but they all basically have the same components: a wheel speed sensor held into a hub, which is held in with basically one bolt. Most of the time it's one bolt, and you remove it and fish it out and do your best to find where it's connected to the harness and remove that as well. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do before we do any kind of repair on this vehicle is disconnect our negative battery terminal using a 10mm socket or wrench. If you're using a wrench, like I am, make sure you don't connect the two by accident, because it will heat up and sparks will fly and you have a potential of blowing up the battery. So just be careful if you're using a wrench like me. Or long enough wrench, I should say. We can just store this negative battery terminal lead down and away so it doesn't accidentally touch while we're working. Now the electrics to the vehicle are dead and we can continue. So the first thing we're gonna do on this particular vehicle is assess where our wheel sensor is and where the connector is in relation to it. So if we peek around the left side of this rear brake assembly, we can see that that is it, where the end of my pointer finger goes. So that's pretty easy, right? You remove this bolt and it comes off, that's okay. And then it's bolted to the shock assembly. And then it's also bolted on right here, just there. And it's bolted to the body right here. And we know that you don't just fish this through because the new one has these brackets as well. But then it goes behind our inner fender liner. So our first step in replacing that sensor is removing our inner fender liner. So let's go ahead and do that. So on some makes and models, you don't have to remove the inner fender liner like I'm doing here. I know on the GM stuff, especially trucks, there is no inner fender liner, so you don't have to do this, but if it's a car, you'll probably have to do this. And it's not that bad. Body clip puller really helps. So with our inner fender removed, we can see that it actually goes into the car with this little grommet fitting here. So that's fun. That means we're gonna have to probably get underneath the back seat. So with that rear panel out of our way, we can actually get to what we're doing. And it did take some considerable taking apart to get to this ABS sensor plug-in. Why they have it this far into the cab, I have absolutely no idea, but sometimes that's the luck of the draw. Sometimes they're easy, sometimes they're hard. This one's a pretty difficult one just because of how much extra work there is, not related to the actual sensor itself. See, that's where that grommet that came in on the wheel well. That's where it comes up and plugs into our wiring harness. So we just disconnect this, pry this out of the body, and then feed that through that hole. So now we can undo our electrical connector here. There we go. And then we can pry this out of the body because our new one has one. Body clip puller, buy one. And then we can just push this wire through the body of our car. All right, we can remove the 10mm bolts that hold our wire to our chassis here. There we go. Now we can take our wheel sensor wire and kind of fish it around for removal. There we go. The wheel sensor itself is held in with a 10mm. Go ahead and remove that. Go. Gonna work that bad boy out. That's what it looks like. So now, with our new wheel speed sensor in hand, we can replace that. Now those are gonna differ from make and model, and they're also gonna vary sometimes side to side and front to back. So just keep an eye out on when you're purchasing a new wheel speed sensor, where exactly in the vehicle you're replacing it. We're doing a right rear, so I have a right rear one. Make sure it's lined up properly with the bolt hole. Make sure that's nice and snug, and then we can finish routing it. So routing your wire is going to look a teeny bit different from car to car, but the concept is basically the same. Keep it away from the tire and any kind of moving suspension component. There we go. And we can continue routing on the other side of the strut tower, making sure our wire clears any kind of moving part. There we go. Looking good. Looking good. Now we can feed our wire up through the wheel well and into the car. Like that. Want to make sure that this seal seats really well, because this is what keeps water out of the car. There we go, that's perfect. So if that seal isn't quite right, or if it's not sitting completely flush against it, you'll never create a nice watertight seal, and you'll end up with mildew in your car, and you don't want that. So make sure that this is seated nice and properly. It's pretty easy to put in, as I just showed. The next thing we can do is replace our inner fender liner. And this might bite us a little bit. It might be a little tricky and inconvenient to put in, but just keep working it and you will get it. So here's basically what your finished product should look like. And obviously it's going to differ from vehicle to vehicle. And you know, try to keep track of where the specific, you know, screws go, because this particular inner fender liner was held on with bolts, screws, and like 2 different types of body clips. I actually had to replace one of them. That hole doesn't go anywhere, but I had to replace this one because it just snapped to pieces while I was removing it. So it's a good idea to have a body clip set, which you can get on Amazon for very, very inexpensive. And if you lose track of where to put all this stuff, you have a cheat sheet, because the other side is either gonna be exactly the same or very, very similar. And on the top of our wheel well, we can go ahead and place our sensor back into its connector. Just like that. Make sure these are nice and connected. And then we can replace the panel. So this is more or less what your finished product should look like. No big gaps anywhere, all the weather stripping replaced nice and evenly. I mean, they're pieces of plastic, so stuff like this is pretty normal. You're not gonna get it down to the micron, because even the stock stuff, there's gaps. So don't be too concerned with that. As long as there's not giant gaps and you don't break anything when you're putting it in, just be nice and gentle, and really massaging it in seems to work really well. And don't press too hard and break any clips off, and replace body clips. I have a great kit right here from Dorman. This no-name brand kit underneath is pretty good. It has all these different kinds of body clips, which you might need if you break, and well, I broke quite a few because they just crumble to pieces in your hands. There's really nothing you can do. But other than that, putting the interior panel back in, not that big a deal. Just take your time, go slow, be gentle. Alrighty, now we can reconnect our negative battery terminal cable. And when we're doing that, we want to touch the cable or the end to the terminal to make sure we don't get any kind of huge sparks. because if you get enormous sparks, you want to be able to take the battery lead off of it very easily. And if you're using a 10mm wrench like I am, make sure you don't bridge the gap between the negative and positive terminals, or you could use a socket just as good. And there we go. So that's how to replace your wheel speed ABS sensor. For pretty much any make or model, I wanted this video to be as general as possible to help as many people as possible. Despite being a different make or model, everything's going to work pretty much exactly the same way that I just showed in the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy what I do here in the channel, please consider clicking the join button or the subscribe button down below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.